All right, hold on. I think we got it now.
Yeah, it's showing YouTube live. You did it.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. I was beginning to have a heart attack.
You're good.
Do we need to let the participants into the room?
We have to get out of the practice session to go live to let the participants in, Jonathan.
Okay, I can see the room is filling up. We'll just give it a minute.
Will, can you mute your microphone?
Okay.
Yeah, folks are coming into the room. We're just going to give them a minute. Okay, we are live. We're going to get started in 1 minute. More folks are joining us. Just going to wait a second. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the San Francisco State Poetry Center. We have an amazing night of poetry for you lined up with Sotère Torregian and Will Alexander. These are two major American poets. I've had the pleasure of associating with them for many years now, actually decades at this point, largely under the banner of surrealism. They're going to read probably about 20-30 minutes each, and then we're going to open up to audience questions and comments. And please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to put in your comments and questions to the poets. And that's going to be after Sotère and Will read. Sotère Torregian is going to go first. So yay, welcome everyone to this night of amazing poetry. I'm going to introduce Sotère, and then Sotère will come on and we'll hear from him. So Sotère Torregian, born in Newark, New Jersey, was active as a young poet in the New York School during the 60s in New York City, becoming close friends with the likes of Ted Berrigan, Joe Chiaravalo, and John Ashbery. He attended Rutgers University and taught briefly at the Free University of New York and at Stanford University, where he helped establish the Afro-American Studies program in 1969. At that time, he proposed a kind of American surrealism based on reinterpretations of surrealist stands on revolutionary perspectives in art, poetry, and theology. His book, On the Planet Without a Visa, came out from Coffee House Press, and his latest book is In an Era of Pillage from Anon Editions. Sotère presently resides in Morgan Hill, California. So let's welcome Sotère Torregian. Hi, Sotère.
Hi, Sotère Torregian here. I have an address for the San Francisco Poetry Center, 8th of December, 2022. As my recent book published by Tom Burns and Richard Wara from Anon Press will testify by its title, we are indeed living in an era of pillage. Incessant violence and threat of yet more pandemics to come. I try to shut out as much as possible the daily broadcasts, but that does no good. The evidence is still there. Desolation in the Ukraine and continuous lies and fabrications by the oppressor Russia, enough to reenact the scenes of the four horsemen of the apocalypse: death, war, destruction. I never thought that after Vietnam and World War II and the Cold War, I would ever see another war in this my lifetime. But here it is, played out before us on the nightly news. We are at risk, but the whole planet is at risk. So much for the progress of capitalist growth in shaping Western civilization. In the 21st century, we cannot halt floods and the ravage of forest fires that wipe away whole towns. Smokey the Bear is now but a sad ghost roaming over forests. The lies of militarists and globalist purveyors remain. The bottom line is profits before people. Again, it's the same age-old question. What can poetry do about all this? Yes, it can awaken and sound the alarm, but it would seem the majority of indigenous peoples are illiterate and engulfed with superstition. Yet the challenge remains. John Keats said in one of his letters, circa about 1820, call it if you will, the veil of soul making. No doubt he couldn't foresee the Holocaust or the millions dead in the aftermath of World War II. Yet the poet has remained the guilty consciousness of the race, as St. John Peirce declared in his Nobel acceptance speech in 1960. James Joyce spoke of the planet, James Joyce spoke of the poet as the antenna of the race. As for the greatness of Russian poetry, it has always been voiced by the dissidents of that nation and has exercised an invaluable influence on my life, which I most appreciate, and that of my poet friends in past days in New York. I'm thinking of Frank O'Hara and Joe Chiravallo in particular, amongst others. Boris Pasternak, in his poems of Dr. Joavo, continue to bear witness to our own time, even with its threat, once again, of nuclear war facing our country and that of all nations, civilization itself. In answer to the weariness that often plagued that poet in his latter years, he spoke in his poem, When I Grow Weary, the following lines. I have in my life applied to myself, as I do now, the strong in hope endure the plagues and suffering that bring them low. The translation is not mine, it's from Eugene V. Hayden's translation from the Russian of Boris Pasternak poems, University of Michigan, 1959. My grandmother, who passed away from this earth in October 1953, I commemorate these words to you. The first poem I will read is a brand new poem that was composed, possibly a month ago. You come to me beyond the shadows. I've dedicated it to Will Alexander and in memory to a young girl I knew at one time, Tanya Tinkoff. À celle qui fait le paillon sacre de ma vie, rencourant des mémorations. From emcee Soleil Coucoupé, to her who awakens in me sacred pecans to warble with recollection. As she steps out of the pages of Allure magazine, Kerry Washington appears holding a giant clock in the shape of a globe that covers her nakedness. She speaks now the words, woman, life, freedom. As I hold the golden globes of Moscow in my hands, I turn and speak unto them the words, woman, life, freedom. I raise Ophelia from her watery grave with the words, woman, life, freedom. The towers and minarets of Shiraz and Isfahan in Iran are shaken with the words, woman, life, freedom. Words of truth, not the lives of mullahs, hierarchs and oligarchs of state, announcing the end of morality, police, and hijabs. These are the only words I hear now permeating my consciousness, woman, life, freedom. As my doppelganger stands in homage before Lenin's tomb, as it stands where Miriam Anderson once stood before the Lincoln Monument, and before I was born, the child as yet an embryo leapt in my mother's womb, embracing the sound and the thread of a long poem begun there. That I speak of poetry now. Oh, to transcend the barriers of space and time, 1,000 years to the great pyramid of Tenochtitlan, where young women were sacrificed to the god Quetzalcoatl, their hearts cut out by hoary Aztec priests. These too are remembered as revolutionary women. Speak the words in Persian, Zan, Zandegi, Asadi, woman, life, freedom, in Tehran. As I walk the unknown one amongst pilgrims on the Via Dolorosa, the way of the cross in Jerusalem, the cry rises from Arab Palestine, Nisa, Haya, Il-Hurriya, woman, life, freedom, in Arabic. I am trying to write, but the paper is not big enough to hold the words, woman, life, freedom. That's October 27, 2022. Sotère. I'll read a selection from other works. From my book, In an Era of Pillage. Memorial Day in memory of Ted Berrigan. There's nothing going on today inside the Statue of Liberty's head. Nothing but useless trash on TV. Can you imagine someone saying this to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, circa 1825? I didn't think so. Nothing to do but learn to write letters again, thanks to the Sumerians' gift of cuneiform and birthday wishes from Ace Hardware. So happens another Memorial Day that folds into history. The woman I once loved has long ago disappeared. She left me with only her footprint and moved to Indianapolis, where race cars wait all year in their stalls to zoom, zoom, zoom their engines again. From afar, an African griot looks out at the spectacle and says, "What the hell's all this good for anyway?" No one living can respond. May the 31st, 2021. We have to be checking the time here. I'm not sure how we're going. Don't have a clock on me.
You're good, Sotère. You can go. You can go for another a little while. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll read a work from my new book called Fragmenti. It's not yet published. It's called Another Hump Day for Colin Schuster. Et c'est la pénombre, le nid de deux propos, from Leopold Sédar Senghor Nocturnes. Somewhere I remember humpbacked whales are singing this morning. I can't seem to tell the difference between the hour hand and the minute hand on my Chinese clock as I wait to the laborers of Hercules daily cleaning out the cat's litter box. Again, I am dependent on the forces of gravity to hold me up. Prelude to another adventure in dreaming, yet now without my stash of Playboy magazines, long gone, as a source to inspire the hazards of becoming and change. It's now June the 8th on Omaha Beach. Shouts of some kids about to go for a swim near the white rows of crosses of fallen GIs. There are also stars of David there. A cash register about to ring up today for the next gun to be sold in America. Wall Street's ready for Dow Jones averages to soar. Again for Smith and Wesson. Yet in the silence, I find my way through, though unable to grapple with the day's events. Oh, that I had wit enough as bottom in a midsummer night's dream to get out of this wood. Feeling better now, as I have been given leave by the poem to head on for the loo. Okay, let's see, we got another one that can read or no?
You have time, Sotère. Go ahead.
Okay. This is a poem for Alexis and Sophia Rosinski. It's called On the Night of the March of Evil. Et nous reconduirons aux portes de la ville, and we shall usher out at the gates of the city. From St. Jean Purse, Pluie. On the night of the March of Evil, death sounded the drums. Excuse me. On the night of the March of Evil, death sounded the drums amid the howls and imprecations that and lit tiki torches of the marches, while life waited for those who resisted with the same cry once cried out from the barricades in Spain, no pasarán. on the night of the March of Evil was witnessed beneath the lintels, history repeating itself in the ordure of a bevy of grave robbers and a host of ghosts, exalting the fiendish carnage of Auschwitz. On the day after the March of Evil, the defenders on the side of life prevailed, though not unscathed. A young woman would not see daylight again, but Charlottesville will henceforth be emblazoned with Madrid, Lexington, Harper's Ferry, the Warsaw Ghetto, Sharpeville, Petrus Bridge, Selma. On the day after the March of Evil, the defenders of life formed their human phalanx and would once again triumph against the purveyors of death. The woman mentioned was Miss Heather Danielle Heyer, died, killed by one of the right-wingers, May the 29th, 1985, August 12th, 2017. The poem was written on the 12th of August. I don't know. Let's see what we have. I'll read one last poem for Yigashiga Charantz called The Mayakovsky of Armenia. To Yigashiga Charantz, the Mayakovsky of Armenia. De nouveau, tu me soulèves, souvenir. Again, you lift me up, memory, from Senghor, Elegy Measure. O trampled land, O trampled soul, where in your soul all of history yet roams and awaits the day of resurrection. A withered hand writes, inscribing in blood on the wall, L'Arménie vivant, soundless, the perpetual womb in my breast. Names of forebearers I will never know, entombed on the road to the Syrian desert. The dogwood flower glows day and night, tended lovingly by an unseen woman's hand, which in turn soothes the sweat from your brow. Whose child is Anahid, culled from the black mirror of memory? People speak of words, but don't know they are born in blood. A man can die for speaking them. A woman's life turned around in a second. Oh, of words, bound for a lifetime of servitude, and for the garden of Serendip, where in your cell, my brother, all of history yet roams through the dark night of the soul that awaits the day. October 2017. That's about it for me.
Thank you, Sotère. Thank you so much. That was beautiful.
I hope I didn't go over the time limit.
You did not. You did not. And we've already had a comment in the Q&A box about how you're showing how poetry can stay relevant and speak to the times that we're living in. So
Always is.
yeah, thank you for that. And we're after Will's going to read now, but after that, we're going to open it up to the audience. And please,
I look forward to Will.
Yeah. Please put your questions and comments in the Q&A box. Okay, let's go.
How do
over
I
to Will.
sign off?
Is that Sotère? Okay, see you in a minute. Okay, let's go over to Will Alexander now. And Will, it's time to turn your camera on.
Okay.
Hi, there you are.
Hello there.
Hi, there you
How
are.
you doing?
Good.
to see you. Haven't
Good,
seen
good.
you in a long time.
Yeah,
I know.
it's been a minute.
Well, it's been a
yeah.
couple days or so.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let me do this brief introduction and then you can read the work. So Will Alexander, born in Los Angeles, lived there all his life, went to UCLA, but While rooted in LA, Will's work expands outward to and actually requires the entire cosmos for its scene of action and subject matter. Will Alexander's writing ranges through history, biology, astronomy, and metaphysics, frequently featuring voices that come across as shape-shifting trickster figures. The form that his work takes is likewise shape-shifting, appearing as poetry, plays, novels, and essays. Not only that, but Will's creative spirit also ranges beyond the written word into visual art and music, as Will plays piano in many jazz and experimental music situations. Among Will's latest books are Refractive Africa from New Directions Press and Divine Blue Light, the most recent pocket poets book from City Lights. Among his many awards, Will was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry this year. So let's welcome Will Alexander.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. I'm gonna start off by reading a poem for Fernando Pessoa. It's called Condoned to Disappearance. It's for Pessoa, and I'm going to read a partial part of the poem because it goes on, but to get the synecdoche, the part for the whole, so you get a chance. When you get the book, you can go through the whole poem, but I'm going to start off with just giving you a foretaste of the whole. And this is called Condoned to Disappearance. By the way, Octavio Paz mentioned that in one of his introductions to Pessoa, that Pessoa would kind of disappear in front of your very eyes. And I had this same experience years ago with Bob Kaufman, that the energy he just disappeared in front of my, after I blinked once and he was gone. So the magic of poetry, and this is Condoned to Disappearance for Fernando Pessoa. As sigil camouflaged by curious smoke and surcease, there remains your visage, enigmatic and crystal, remaining hidden within occulted lingual ravines. At one level, it is known that your appellation is Fernando Pessoa, born 13 June 1888. Of course, there exists the perfunctory tables of your chronicle, loss of your natural father at 5, your mother's remarriage and new placement in Durban, then university stay fueled by magnetic indifference, then life in rented rooms, then business letters translated from Portuguese to English and French, then criticism written in 1912, creative prose in 1913. And the following year, poetry, the heteronyms, their powers, the conspicuous agendas, including Alberto Cairo, Ricardo Reyes, Alvaro de Campos, then one brief romance, the limited publication, then death by cirrhosis of the liver, a capsule, an unleavened symmetry, a migratory transit events from my written realm as co-sensation. And why do I emphasize the migratory? Is it because you've always assumed kinetics that reveal ghosts emerging and re-emerging from Lisbon? Fernando, being figurative insularity, roaming a perch of invisible magnificence, retreating to an emblematic edge only to return as visual briefings, to emit perfection by scent, by confounding observation, lit from within by inner magnificence, your inner eye, a refracted body of diamonds that formed as an inner cyclonics as true and concussive blood form. Your poetic forces, gazing via scattered combination, understanding the rankings of minerals, not unlike an imaginary ostrich on fire with its primeval thesis, understanding precursors, drafts, flowing from various forms, rife with altering. Your personality, human microbial filtration, as anonymous phantasmic shift of various lingual maturation, being high art ascender, as itinerant breathing codes that range from susurrant of inaudible deafening. You remained invisible, remaining silently tumultuous, not unlike a primeval calamity, perhaps a burning Richter as birds housing in your spirit. Choreodraken, Boreas, Quetzalcoatlus, Quetzalcoatlus, symbolic of your oversized lingual spell, spanning your anonymous heteronyms, not as a gesture of looks or feral figurines. I'll stop it at this point because the poem travels on much further. And I want to get some other works in because this book, Divine Blue Light, is been written for John Coltrane, but it also carries other works in it that are like quite compact in terms of my style. But I do understand that poetry exists in one word or two words. It's not a big tome, although I've been known to write tomes that travel hundreds of pages, but this is a particular poem that I wrote for the civilian astronaut, Sian Proctor. And by the way, she took this poem into outer space, one of the few poems that has left Earth. And this is called According to Stellar Scale for Sian Proctor. Stellar scale, risen above wizened technical complexity, synonymous with a carriage of moons being vapor that rises and electrifies the cells according to true interior functioning, according to voltage that submerged itself while soaring, according to balance as magnetic heightening, not as extension harassed behind a wall of borders, but magnetism as ignited significance that partakes of parsecs, that inspires revelation, being ignited first health, where being conjoins with itself as aboriginal revelation. You know, that was dedicated to what has been transferring in the astronomical mind in the past several months with the launch of the Webb telescope. And of course, you know, we know the precursor, the Hubble, and all the enormous suns that are out there that are available to consciousness. We're not like a Miller was, a European Miller was in 1325, although the mind, the general mind of the Google listener and purveyor is one of the old Miller, like reduced and wizened to one single sun. We're talking about infinite suns, infinite movements of the mind through these suns. And this is what poetry picks up for me at this large expanse that we need to, we travel through. I shouldn't say we need to travel through, but we do travel through. And so I'm going to continue these smaller poems with this one that I jumped back a little bit in time from our previous era. And it's called Assessing Gertrude Bell. A lot of people don't know Gertrude Bell, but she was like, I'd say she was a co-conspirator with in the Middle East with mapping borders. She was an adventurer like to Lawrence of Arabia, and they commingled at certain points. But she was doing the same kind of program that she was dividing borders, and as we know, via Fallujah and all of the instigations that happened in Iraq, these were old borders that created chaos later on and responsible for many, many dead. So I'll mention this as Assessing Gertrude Bell. Should I isolate your brilliance by pausing its causation, as if you were an artifact or a scorched round shell. I could never name you as a seminal tactician or a queen mistress of hives. I would render your scale one of cryptic molecules that existed according to causality by debacle. Your war diplomacy led to friction, to pre-cloned attempts at utopia, but always your raw, unaided colonizers' postings, summoned from inherent maneuvering in your mappings, alive with pre-cloned attempts at utopia, alive with the Holocaust to follow. You, as lone wolf, as primeval with guile, as ignited and imperative with fortitude, as map maker, bifurcating desert terrain, as a spy insistently indicating names who grace the region with foreshortened compassion, complexification being your orbit as danger with its obligation to decipher the long-standing secrets, the lingual powers of the tribal wives who clarified deficits, who understood your activity as glassy, incremental flux. Being subdivided with Lawrence in the Arab Bureau, casting ripples that ignited future life and death, not as omnipotence, but strategy as colonial conformity. Because you ignited the blazing archaeology of mapping as transmission, future death was summoned, a cheerless residue was defined. Faisal Ibn Hussein, a broken monarch, understood principal aspects of your tremor. Thus, the void you instilled, hastened volatility, always summoned within your demeanor. And I'll travel on a couple more smaller poems. And I always say that writing poetry is essential, not because of its large summation, but because of its concentration, according to the power that each line impacts. And for me, the small poem is just as magical as any other composition one writes. It's the essence of writing as far as I can see. You don't need that many words. You need the concentration and the power of the language at hand. And this language is at hand now. I call it grammars from other suns. The human state as negated microtorrent, never alive as flux, sans dialectical originality, masquerading as subatomic particle as noun, a blinded equation into itself that can't portend livingness as transmuted range, as incendiary compass that fuels riddles, that accelerates mystery, that spirals as the field engaging the 8th chakra, as sub-blended quantum nuance that enlivens its partial power beyond itself as compound stasis, as episodic gesture, its plenum never absorbing grammars from other suns. This is always a singularity. Poetry is a singularity of transmission across languages and across time shiftings. It's like the northern deserts in Arabia were once very fertile. Things shift. Who knows how these shiftings transpire with our present humanity? And like we're always compounding the present as a total stitch in time, as if this particular moment were the only reasoning for its own existence. It's not that way. And so the mentality of the current mentality of the authors of the circumstance quite mistaken. Only the short view or the foreshortened view. And here's a small 3-line poem called Under Corporate Worship. Sunday being elliptically flamed, tautological circumference. So it doesn't take that many lines to get your energy through. And this is a piece called Deficits. Andrew Joron and Joan Miro. Earlier on, negatively imprisoned by chronic familial assessment, Miro, as if anonymous crime had been proposed, a misdemeanor linked to Teutonic deficit, to bleak and conjoined unfurling, a chronicle devoid of light as efficiency, essence implanted as perpetual doubt, judged by the projected field of others. You were a dense, mystagogic trampoline according to contorted attempts. As for Sertine, embittered within a rural world of murder, a combustion of ravens, of gestures condoned by nervous conquering statics, absorbing chronic social signals by non sequitur. These are the energies we're trying to subsist with, trying to bring water out of stone. I like to say, drilling through poetry is like drilling through rock to get to the essences of things. And I'll read maybe one other piece from this Divine Blue Light, which will be the signature piece for John Coltrane, who it's called Divine Blue Light, Sudden Ungraspable Nomadics. It's for John Coltrane. I feel very close to Train because of, this was the first time I've written on Coltrane, by the way. I was introduced to John Coltrane, auto-introduced by the radio signal is a 13-year-old. And I was listening to his work, Olay. I never forgot that experience. And hearing McCoy come in on those block chords drove me nuts, and it still drives me nuts. And so this is going to be a portion again of this particular poem, Divine Blue Light, Sudden Ungraspable Nomadics. Not as phantom blinding, but the soils of Mount Meru as quantum, as perpetual, as interdimensional kindling. Its hemispheres colliding as bricolage, as osmosis, as sonic notation. Alive as sonic commentary phantoms, understood unto themselves as stratospheric particulates, not merely as tense foundational structures, as a pronoun to be levied as simple sonic ramification. You understood this to be in the infinity of your heart, to be microscopic musical grammar, not unlike phosphates, as a syntax of symmetry resounding as an obverse mirroring of chords, analogous to 16th notes, rising and scattering of their own accord, much like the residue from diamonds that bake, not simply shrill supplication as noise, but as spectral realms of themselves. Being sonic blinding bodies that rise and loop and gather themselves on the other side of themselves, not as artifact or translated merger, but as exploration summons, so that the sonic never wizens by pursuing entangled osmosis as complex utopian turquoise. And it was on this plane that you and Dolphy squared comet into thrilling electrical prophecy that both forged and scrambled light, so that amperage split apart and scattered across soil as interregnum, being blizzards of grammar, not merely emitted from bodies, but sound as hail from unknown wizardry that sired sonic thoughts and streams, understanding such flow as transmuted acre. And again, I'll leave it at this point because the book is out. One can begin to read it and absorb the whole array of language, because it goes on for many, at least another 40, 50 pages. So on that note, I don't know what we're doing on time, but I intend to just read a couple of passages from Refractive Africa, which, as Andrew Joron pointed out, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize this year. And I'm going to read a portion from this poem called The Congo. And again, it's very expanded. And it's for the resistance rendered by the Peruvian Casimiro Barrios and, of course, Fela Kuti. And the former was was hunted down by the authorities. He was basically a insurrectionist, and Fela Kuti was an insurrectionist. So the spirit is based on a kind of natural insurrection. And the voice is from an Akashic or West African Sangoma. Well, Sangoma is a magical force in the reality of West African understanding. And he says, as Akashic Sangoma, I peer into the Congo as transpersonal witness, as incisively faceted tiger, squirming, having the powers of a shark, via forces that sculpt the lenticular as lightning, perhaps a telepathic wakefulness, perhaps magisterial conjuration, creating migrational litmus in our blood, thereby knowing the dangerous template that is the Congo. Blood infected, day's conundrum, horrific with grandeur, solemnly lit by grainy episodes of lightning. Thus, duplicitous tragedy, innate with microcentric suffering, its stressful indictment, its tertiary woundings, its camps, its darkened glossolalia at the height of bloody moonrise. As far as auric markings, I am never plagued by microtessellation, by extended physical armament, as if under siege, listening to dysfunctional scallops. This being none other than spectral conflict, consulted by looming sentiments, by the spectral inflame that allows the mind to consume itself as refraction, as a smoldering mental sea. Knowing resonance via Akashic transference, I spontaneously engage levitational fields. Therefore, I engage magnetism and magically invade latitudes in formation by astonishment, by conundrum, by circuitous circulation, according to the realm of osmosis, non-aligned to the institutional as drama. Via intuition, I leap to China and its pragmatic repression, its sociological deprecation. Therefore, I take issue with pragmatic epistles, mechanical as they are, with superimposed stasis conveyed as pointless equilibrium, always desirous of burning roads into swamps, placing taxable recognition on grain, or pulling wayward crops from earth. These are measures that suffocate the Congo with its intricate mysteriums, so that we cultivate endemic demise, so that we cultivate infected tautology that brews us ventriloquial diamonds, shattered in such a manner that we become studded with foreign domination that degrades, according to a wattage from Belgium, or entangled castles in Britain or psychic swamps in the Vatican. And above all, sire, general psychic clouding, siring a nightmare of particulars, negatively alive with carnivorous anti-resonance, a resonance that reigns as compromised respiration, alive as the global Occident, with its self-defaunation as fever, with its thought always active, as befouled arrangement, to percussive ostentation, as poisoned psychic fuel, as manufactured habitats, as emblematic dysfunction. The Occident, searching for hallowed animal function, for the poisonous protraction as facade that has left us exhausted, enfeebled, burning with quantum negation, with the non-resurrected grafted to negation of ourselves. When the Belgians told us we were purposeless, we believed. When Christian nuns struck across our brow, we believed. We believed that part of our galaxy was centered in Liège, in the Place Vendôme, and concentrated fumes gathered from London's iconic bridge. Thus, our psychophysical wattage, reduced to phantom galling, to palpitating candles, to broken cellular infernos. Thus we exist as phantom kobolds in tin, as blind psychic enumeration that issue from itinerant conundrums, creating in our minds a complex physical scale, thereby creating Erstad's archaeology, wayward Christian voids, being none other than spreading micro-infection that attempts at weakening the stability of the soul, this being attempted annihilation, exponential as expanded annihilation that parallels the triplicate component of the spirit, mind, and body. As a Akashic freedman, I'm able to peer through and beyond the pitch of European corrosion and its attendant psychic confusion that occludes itself via the pole of matter, via the dialectic that begins to feign itself through properties that evince mechanism as a upgrade so that it kills and scatters all indigenous subtext. In order for indigenous power to ascend beyond abstruse delimitation, we must decipher printed reams concerning the post-colonial dossiers on Christ. This remaining our charred psychic vicinity, co-woven with implanted prevarication, with its slaughtered spinning in verbs, not unlike moist Shombe in the Kabilas, having sired and kept alive tenacious psychophysical noise as racket, as modular drones sent to root out secrets, all the while concocting a sun that descends and rises on obverse slaughter fields, where nausea perfects its phantoms on earth, where all of our corpses are publicly conveyed, crowned by a garland of lizards wrapped around our skulls, not unlike anemones awash amidst scorpions, Europeans seeing us less higher than our tortured calls, issuing from the mouths of lions. I'll stop it at this point because I don't know where we're at with time, but these poems travel for quite distances in terms of scope and time, and I think it may be a good place to stop and try to consider our totality at this moment.
Yeah, thank you, Will. That was great. Thank you for that visionary reading. And I'd like to invite Sotère back into the room. Sotère, if you could turn on your mic and camera. There you are. Hi. Okay. Yeah. All right. So we have just heard readings from two visionary American poets, and we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. But first, I want to ask you guys if there's an origin story that you can share about how you came into poetry, how you first woke up to becoming a poet. And Sotère, if you want to tell us first.
Oh, God, that is very difficult. I think it was probably some of the stories that my grandmother used to tell me about Persephone and the ancient island where my people came from. I think that was the beginning. Caught my imagination. At that time, I didn't have any concept. We were talking about 1950 or so. I had no concept of, African origins until my teenage time. Then I grappled onto it, and recognized that these African origins were part of my ancestors, along with my Arab and Greek, background, Byzantine, I should say. So these all played into poetry. I should also say, when I was maybe about, very, very young, comic books like Crazy Cat. I loved Crazy Cat, the comic book. Of course, you guys don't even know what that is anymore. Felix the Cat, Crazy Cat. All of those comics played into my consciousness as poetry. I saw even Orphan Annie. I saw all of those as reality of poetry, and it came to me. And then when I was in school, and I had to take classes about poetry, I failed poetry. I hated poetry. I hated the way they taught it because I didn't understand what the hell that they were doing. Going from A-B to A-B, what the hell is that? That's not reality. That's nonsense. So consequently, I chose to fail poetry at the age of 14 or 15. But at that time, I was writing my own poetry, despite what the teachers were teaching. My poems came out like Whitman's at that time. And then, of course, I went on to find Walt Whitman, and it kind of, coalesced with me. And that's how things started. I know it sounds very disconcerting, but
Not at
that's the
all.
way-
Not at all. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, you could say poetry forces language to the point of failure, and that's when new meanings can rush in.
And
So
later on, I discovered African and American Indian poetry. And I said, that's where real poetry resides, not in this goddamn Western world. That's where real poetry resided. I said, long before Dante wrote, there were African tom-toms who wrote out poetry, although you did not know what it was. So that's my
Thank you.
viewpoint.
thank you.
Yeah.
What about you, Will? You have an origin story that you can share?
Yeah, well, it's unlike Sotère's, but it was like a blizzard of magical markings along the way, which I never knew I was destined for this, but I was feeling my way through this blindness. And as I mentioned, I listened to this Ole recording. I was 13, and it started leading me on to, people like Jackie McLean and to all the other plethora of magical people, musicians. And this led through a series of misshapings during adolescence, late adolescence, and certain political veerings. And I found, after I was exhausted, I found poetry. I found I could write something down. And I wrote my first poem after I read a book about Rimbaud. And I said, oh, this is something I can do. I felt, not that I knew, but I felt. And so I've been feeling that energy ever since. and it's blossomed into what it's become. So I don't have a lot of.
Yeah.
That's the essential part for me.
Yeah. Okay, folks,
No, but he wrote the book called The Brimstone Boat.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that book was for Philip
Brimstone
Lamantia.
Boat.
Yeah,
Remember?
for Philip.
Right.
Yeah, well, the great Philip Lamantia was very instrumental in my
Both of us.
development later on in my life. Amazing,
yeah. I think
amazing being.
Philip Lamantia was a reference point for all of us here.
Oh, amazing.
Now it's time for you folks in the audience to put your questions or comments into the Q&A box. And if you've got something specific for one of the poets or both of them, please let us know. While we're sitting here, do you either of you, Sotère or Will, have a question you would like to ask each other?
Sotère, we're talking about this bumping into all these different realities and all these incredible background that you have as a being, tapping into that, and how does that shape? How does that shape your lingual resonance? I don't mean that academically, but in how do you feel? How does it shape your lingual resonance?
You're speaking about that to me, Will?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I think part of it is blood, and whatever these ancestral elements have, coagulated in my blood. I guess I was feeling these things before I could really speak. But then at a point, I began to speak, and these things came out in me, and I would write them down. And at times when I was such a kid, I didn't know really what I was writing, but I was writing. I think I wrote my first poem when I was about 14 years of age, and it was published in the book, I Must Go, She Said, published some time ago. I did publish some of those. So it's hard to say. I would say for me, part of this was my political consciousness. I read the Communist Manifesto when I was 15 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
Politically speaking, I have never differed from that consciousness. And it pervades, it goes into my poetry, along with the surrealism of Breton.
Mm.
It's part and parcel of the whole thing. So that's what I can say about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sotère, do you have a question
I
that
don't
you would
know
like
if that's a very adequate answer to your question.
Thank you, Sotère. Do you have a question you'd like to ask Will?
Sure. You seem to have a lot of scientific allusions in the work that you do. When did you first start feeling these feelings about, science, other worlds, etc.? That's very interesting.
Well, it's interesting. Before I knew anything, I was 9 years old, and I had a little library that I was able to get a little book out about. I always check that book out. It was about the solar system.
Yeah, good.
Everybody was thinking about doing this and doing that, but I was pulling out a book on the solar system. And that just kind of led me to this thing and that thing, but I was blind about it. And as Philip Lamantia pointed out many years later, that he says your poetry comes out of your maternal instincts. And my mother was very, very enlightened on the invisible. She was not particularly cognitively well educated, but she was very sharp. And this thing has carried over in me. He says, you were born from your mother's powers. And this kind of shaped me along the way blind as I was going through all of the struggles I've been through, but it's been a way through all the way. And I still count on that. It's still, I dedicated my large book to the big combustion cycle book to my folks, because of the fact of they didn't know cognitively what they were producing.
Yeah,
Some bumps along the way, but it shaped by energies to where they are today.
I relate to that completely. I could say the same for my people.
Yeah, it's a general experience, my friend.
Yeah.
We live in a
You're
wide.
out, you're out there all alone though, in that process.
Mhm.
And it takes time for you to kind of get back to yourself.
Oh, it's tremendous struggle. This poetry is tremendous struggle. Is Daniel Mackey says we're still working on it. We're still working on things. I'm still working on things.
So am I, my friend.
So it is never ending. There's no mastery or something like that.
I know.
So anyway, it's a liberating factor, in your life to be able to work on something like an alchemical energy.
Yeah. Well, I just in response, I want to say that one of my first poems I wrote at the age of, I guess it was 14 in 1957, was the poem to Sputnik. I
Mhm.
loved Sputnik.
Mhm.
There was a beginning of, the craziness when in school we were told we had to emphasize on science, and I hated being involved with that.
Mhm.
But I loved Sputnik as a kind of view of the beyond,
Yeah.
and beyond, the stupidity of nations and states and stupid asses politicians. So Sputnik was one of my first poems.
It was a
It's
liberating
just-
you. Yeah.
Huh? So
Okay.
that was political because I meant it to be political. Because I hated the capitalist system, and I was happy that the Russians sent out Sputnik before the Americans.
Well,
Right.
it's an opening. The heavens are an opening. I call it the Uranian is an opening. And so
Yeah.
you discovered all these other suns are floating in and flooding
Right.
in and out. It seems like the general mindset is like a Miller in 1325. Pre-Copernican. Talking
Right.
about what one had to eat or what one wore last week.
Yeah.
Very, very provincial.
I had the same feeling, Will. I just wasn't able to express it as well as you do.
Well, it's just the energy of expressing that energy. The energy of expressing that energy is what's available to us. And so we can do it through the language that we sometimes script.
Yeah.
Yep. You're both expressing great energy tonight. So please, folks, put your questions or comments into Q&A. There's one seems to be oriented toward Will. Sandra is saying that your poetry makes them conscious of greater forces, and has music played a role into your awareness of these forces?
Sure.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, the initiation via John Train, Eric Dolphy brought a certain kind of a energy, an impact of this search. And I knew they were searching. They were my great emblems of this vast array of search. And, Train and I was able, as I mentioned before to other folks, that I was once able to meet the parents of Eric Dolphy and go into the workspace of Eric Dolphy before it went into the public record. And during that visit, I was able to sit in a chair that John Coltrane sat in and talk about Eric's flute to his father. And like these are magical occurrences. These aren't like looking for as a fan or something like this, but these are like magical touching points, like listening to the horn of Sonny Rollins for 5 hours one evening in the front row. Things like this I looked at as magical connections.
Absolutely right.
to things. So I won't go on too much further, but that's something that struck me.
Can I add something?
Please,
I
go ahead.
consider John Coltrane, Dolphy, I consider them poets.
Absolutely, you're right. Absolutely right.
They're poets to me. They
Yeah.
just happen to work out with musical notes, and I happen to work out with words on a page. But to me, that's poetry.
Absolutely,
poetry.
absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
Okay, we have a comment from Latasha Diggs in the Q&A. This is addressed to Sotère. They say it's really an honor to hear your work in your voice. The poet Joron Noel introduced me to your work last year, and it reminded me of one of the many paths poetry allows us to shape our personal identities. I will also say it helped greatly as I was completing my second book. Thank you. In your bio, you describe yourself as an Africanized Mediterranean. You just briefly touched on this, but can you share with us more about how you came to this understanding in your evolution? What attracted you to writers from the Negritude movement?
Well, the people of the Negritude movement, Senghor, Leopold Senghor, Sédar Senghor, Aimé Césaire, I consider them as absolute mentors to me. They express what I have inside of me, even though it was on a different part of the world. But in effect, you know, my African ancestors were from 1,500 years ago. But as I told to Will, what it is in the blood, and it becomes expressed somehow through the being. And I just can say that I owe so much to Leopold Sédar Senghor. He was a personal friend, I should say. We had a correspondence. Unfortunately, I never had a real correspondence with Aimé Césaire, but they were the ones who formed the Negritude movement, and the Negritude movement is a part of me, and it will always be a part of me. That's all that there is to it. That's all I can say. I hope that might answer your question somewhat, but the African ancestors that I had were gone 1,500 years ago, and I only know about them through history, so to speak. Of course, there were no physical presentations that I could have had. It's all within memory. It's all within memory.
Thank you. Thank you, Sotère.
Sure.
So here's a question for Will from Nancy. Will, could you talk about the poetry of Pessoa and La Mantia and their influence on your poetry?
What I felt, I never cognitively feel poetry. I feel it from the inside as electricity. And for what Philip and Pessoa represented, for me, it was the anomalous. And search for the strange for the sake of the strange. That higher momentum of travel that seems to be invisible, that seems to be, you know, at odds with reality, which it is. And Philip generates this energy par excellence. You know, we had this incredible conversation one evening that lasted over 12 hours. It was more than an evening, but and it was a magical initiation for me. And he just described and talked about things that I felt inside of myself. But the fact is, knowing that other people that in particular experienced this was not something in a book, but something that was part of living experience. So I've never been a literary person as such. And I read lots of books, I've written a lot of books, but I'm not a literary person. It's a poetic energy that's in me all the time. And I call it a river of poetry where you just jump in the river and you're always ready to swim. I can go further than that, but that's in essence what we're talking about, this river of poetry that continues to live throughout all eternity, actually.
It's spoken like a true surrealist.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it should be.
Yeah.
So Terry, you were also a friend of Philip Lamantia. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your connection to him?
Well, part of it was racial because we had same kind of Mediterranean background, racial one. And I discovered Philip's work when I was maybe about, in my 20s. And he was in California and I was in New York. And we corresponded. And eventually, of course, my wife and I came to California and I got to actually meet him. And we found an incredible bonding. I knew the poetry long before I came to California. I was only able to take it out of the library at the time. But I knew that it spoke to me because of my adherence to being a surrealist. And of course, Philip was much older than I was and actually met André Breton in 1944 in New York. Of course, I would have been about 4 years old at the time. But we had many, many things in common. And Philip was always interested in his own African background because he came from the same area where my ancestors came from, and his Arab interests as well as Greek interests. So we had a lot of those things in common. And he was always looking at what I wrote and was always very supportive, very much. He also liked very much my friend Joe Chiravallo's poetry. So we had a lot of things in common in that way.
Sure. Yeah. And I remember he wrote a short introduction to your book, The Wounded Mattress.
Yes, he wrote that while I was in New York and he was in California.
Before you had met?
Before we physically had a chance to get together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he wrote that and sent it to me in New York, and it became part of that book, The Wounded Mattress. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I'm scrolling through the Q&A. There's still plenty of people in the room, but people are being a little shy about Q&A. So
Don't be shy.
yeah, there's a question from or a comment from Joseph to both of you. So Tara and Will, do you feel that there is any cross-pollination between your work, ways in which you feel your work has been impacted by the other poets' work?
Well,
With Will.
well, you know, these are subterranean influences psychologically, where maybe it doesn't show like externally what the work is doing, but internally, that's where you're drawing from. It's like one species comes up and lives in a part of the universe where another species that they fail to resemble each other, but they're drawing sustenance from that same source. And that's how I feel that we're very connected that way.
I agree. The main thing that you've said is talking about that river of poetry. And that's where we're all connected. Well, you and I at least are connected in that way. And we're also connected by, so to speak, our grandfather, André Breton. I don't think I'd be here if I had not known or had been part of what André Breton had spoken about in the Surrealist Manifesto. I would not have been here.
He's a great liberator. Breton was a great liberator in that sense. They can say what they want about this or that, but he just liberated language for everyone.
Exactly. And I should also add that when I spoke about the Negritude movement, it could not have happened without the surrealism.
No, No,
because both
absolutely
of those
right.
poets were part of the Surrealist movement.
And Césaire points out that Breton taught us a direction.
Right, exactly, exactly. So, you know, at the age of 15, I was feeling that, I guess it was 15 or 16, I was feeling that I had Breton looking over my shoulder or walking around with me.
Mhm.
It's crazy, but you know, that's a mystical, that's a mystical feeling, I should have to say. But that's the way it was.
It's a presence.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's exactly. It was a presence. One day I was walking down Broad Street, Newark, New Jersey, and I felt Andre Breton was walking with me
Yeah.
somewhere. I said, wow. So this was quite amazing.
Quite
You know,
amazing.
I hardly ever spoke about this to anybody.
When these magical moments come up for the poets, you know, these touch points that can come through your life, and you can't talk about it because they're so
It's too
invisible.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too much.
And so that you know them, but no one else can figure it out because they're so in the quotidian
Yeah.
cycle of business.
So I had that Newark Public Library available, and I searched out every single book of Breton's. I searched out, and I could not buy them, of course. I searched out every one and withdrew them and read them. And at that time, Breton's work was not available in French, so I had to read it in English at that time.
Sure.
But it was enough. I got transported the way I needed to be transported.
It's a state of consciousness, not a state of language.
Yeah,
That's what I learned from Philip and Bob Kaufman. You know,
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You hit the nail on the head, as they say. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of our time here, and you're both speaking about your debt to surrealism. And when we think of the original Manifesto of Surrealism was published almost 100 years ago.
1924.
Yeah. So what is it about surrealism that allows it to stay relevant in the 21st century?
Let Will go first with that one.
Well, it's the irrigation of consciousness. You're talking about the irrigation of consciousness through language, that one doesn't have to look over one's shoulder for every scrap of language that one seems to acquire. But everything is a vast momentum of consciousness that's rolling throughout the whole universe. We're not just talking about France in 1924 or the Rif War and the Algiers on 26, but you know, we're talking about a vast river of consciousness. That, by the way, we should also include the poets of Le Grand Jeu, the Grand Game of René Dumas and the
René Dumas, yeah.
René Dumas and the Lecomte.
Yeah.
And you should recognize, in other words, recognize poetry, the momentum of poetry, the imagination, I should say, the imagination. Opening.
That's the key word.
Yeah.
You got the key word.
Yeah. Without the imagination, there's this academic exercise.
We're nowhere without that. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a good note to end it on. So thank you, both of you, so much for bringing your visionary poetic powers to this occasion. And it's just great to see you together in the same virtual room and to hear your voice.
Great to be together.
Great to see you, Sotère, and we'll be in touch for sure.
I hope so.
Absolutely. I got your contact point. I'll be in touch for sure.
Please. It's been a long time, Will.
Too long. Okay? Absolutely.
Right.
Okay.
Merci
Thank you for
beaucoup,
everybody
mon
at San Francisco State, Steve, everyone. Andy,
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, what do we do now? Okay. What do we do with this?
We're just going to say bye.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave.
Good job.
Okay.
Good job. Yeah,
Great.
that was
We'll
incredible,
talk- we'll
both of
talk
you.
soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Talk to you.
Adieu, mon ami.
Get out of here. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Soon.